Hey everybody, welcome back to day 4 of the Dominaria set review on the Mana Leek. I'm John as always, and that means it is time for all of the red cards in Dominaria. We're going to go over all of these with a view on draft and sealed. We're not talking about constructed. If you want more disclaimers about my set reviews, etc., go back to the start on the white set review. But let's get started with Bloodstone Goblin. Bloodstone Goblin is 1 and a red for a creature goblin warrior at common. It's a 2/2. Whenever you cast a spell, if that spell was kicked, Bloodstone Goblin gets +1/+1 and gains menace until end of turn. Yeah, even red is now getting bears with upside. The upside's not great though. It's obviously extremely build around. Kicker's a mechanic. There is a decent amount of it in the set, but are you building the kicker deck? I don't think you are. I don't think it really exists. It makes the spells cost more, and so by the time you're casting them, what's a 3/3 menace doing for you? And you're never making this a 4/4 menace. I don't think so. I think it's still a C+ because it's 100% playable as a 23rd card. It is a bear with an upside in red somehow. So yeah, just a C+ for Bloodstone Goblin. Up next is Champion of the Flame. Champion of the Flame is 1 and a red for a creature human warrior at uncommon. It's a 1/1 with trample, and Champion of the Flame gets +2/+2 for each aura and equipment attached to it. Not really a big fan of this. You're not really going to fool me into building up in enchantments and equipment onto this thing just to have it get bounced or die or whatever. There is removal in this set. Even Cast Down hits this, and we talked about how Cast Down is maybe not quite as good as it looks. It's still really good, by the way. I don't know. This is the kind of card that I will die to once or twice. Like 100%, I will just get crushed by this. But the other 99 games, I will deal with this easily. This is a trap. Don't fall for it. I think it's just a straight F. Up next is Fervent Strike. Fervent Strike is a single red mana for an instant at common. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains First Strike and Haste until end of turn. I didn't even see that haste until I just read that card out. Yeah, Fervent Strike, these variants that give First Strike are tending to be some of my favorite combat tricks because it's 1 mana, so you can easily keep it up, and it just blows out in so many cases. Chump blocks become not even trades, just flat out combat wins. Still, even then, it's just a C at best, and like almost all combat tricks, you will cut them if you can, if you have just better cards, but you'll play it and you'll be decently happy with it when you do have that spot. So solid C for Fervent Strike. Up next is Fiery Intervention. Fiery Intervention is 4 and a red for a sorcery at common. Choose 1. Fiery Intervention deals 5 damage to target creature or destroy target artifact. I've been seeing this called Bad Braid because obviously it's a very expensive sorcery speed version of a braid with a couple extra damage tacked onto it. 5 mana for 5 damage is a very, very, very tall ask. It puts this on kind of the far outside edge of playable, especially at sorcery speed. Still, it is probably just a C+. It is going to be removal for an awful lot of creatures in the format. It's going to be 5 mana. The lack of instant speed really sucks. That means there's no way you can ever argue with me that this is better than a C+, but I do think it will get by on a C+. The artifact clause is cute, but you're so rarely ever going to use that side of this card. C+ for Fiery Intervention. Up next is Fight with Fire. Fight with Fire is 2 and a red for a sorcery at uncommon. Kicker 5 and a red, so you can make it cost 7 red. Fight with Fire deals 5 damage to target creature. If this spell was kicked, it deals 10 damage divided as you choose among any number of targets instead. So for 2 and a red, we get Fiery Intervention. We get a significantly better version of Fiery Intervention. And then if it's real late game, and we have the extra 6 mana to pump into this, we can kill probably a lot of things. Or also, because it does say any number of targets, and not any number of target creatures, you can just deal 10 damage to your opponent. People are going to die to this card out of absolute nowhere. When your opponent has 9 mana and they're in red, you need to just assume you're going to die every turn. So you might want to turn up the pressure a little bit. This isn't uncommon, which means they may not have it, but on average, there's going to be 1 per pool. On average, there's typically like 0.9 copies of any one given uncommon. So yeah, be careful about letting the red player get to 10 mana, because you might just take 10 damage. Fight with Fire looks really, really good to me. I would first pick it pretty highly, just because 3 mana for 5, even at sorcery, is fantastic. So I've got Fight with Fire at a solid B+. I don't know that you're always going to get to 10 mana. I don't know that you're rarely going to get 10 mana. But when you do, or sorry, 9 mana, you will deal that 10 damage and feel pretty good about it. So B+ for Fight with Fire. Up next, we're going back to Alpha with Fire Elemental. Fire Elemental is 3 red for a creature elemental at common. It's a 5/4 with no rules text at all. It's fine. There was a time when a vanilla 5/4 on the ground was totally fine, but that was a couple of decades ago. This is just still okay. It plays a lot better than some of the, big power, small toughness creatures. Yargle is what I'm talking about. But, it's better than a Cobble Brute, but not by much. I've got it at a C. I think it's probably even a little bit closer to a C-. It's just super cuttable without any sort of evasion or anything else tacked onto it. So actually, yeah, let's just go C- for Fire Elemental. Up next is Fire Fist Adept. Fire Fist Adept is 4 and a red for a creature human wizard at uncommon. It's a 3/3. When Fire Fist Adept enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to target creature an opponent controls, where X is the number of wizards you control. This doesn't hit opponents, and that really, really, really hurts. It'll remain to be seen if Wizards Tribal is really fully fleshed out as a draft deck, and my first instinct is that it's not. The payoffs aren't good enough for having to play some of the really mediocre, vanilla 2/3 wizards and etc. to actually get there. So I don't think Wizards Tribal is actually going to work. I think it's a trap. The payoff with Adept Wizard or Adept Fire Fist Adept is that you get to kill a creature, I guess, for 5 mana, which is okay. But yeah, I think Fire Fist Adept is just kind of a C+. I think it's pretty much going to play like Stormfleet Pyromancer from Rivals of Ixalan most of the time, and I don't think you're going to get too much higher than that. I'll keep an eye on Blue-Red Wizards, but I think the deck's not really there. And I think if anybody else at the table decides to draft it as well, the deck doesn't exist. So C+ for Fire Fist Adept. Up next is the First Eruption. The First Eruption is 2 and a red for an enchantment saga at rare. The first act, the First Eruption, deals 1 damage to each creature without flying. The second act, add red to your mana pool, which of course doesn't say that anymore. It simply says add red. The third act, sacrifice a mountain. If you do, the First Eruption deals 3 damage to each creature. Not a big fan of the First Eruption. It's a card that I just don't think I would ever play in the main board, and I'd only side it in when I see that my opponent has a bunch of X1s. The second step is also a card that I wouldn't really play. Just getting 2 red mana. I mean, it does let us ramp at least, so on turn 4 we actually potentially have 6 mana, which is maybe good. But again, like all the sagas, you need to use it that turn or else it just kind of goes away. The third step is, I guess, also an effect that I would play, but just telling my opponent, 2 turns in advance that I'm going to cast Anger of the Gods and blow up a mountain to do it is not something I'm really a fan of. So ultimately, I think the First Eruption just isn't a card for me. I know others do like this card a little bit more, but for me, I'm going to start it at a D+ sideboard and an A++ for art. Up next is the Flame of Keld. The Flame of Keld is 1 and a red for another enchantment saga, this time at uncommon. Act 1, discard your hand. Act 2, draw 2 cards. Act 3, if a red source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player this turn, it deals that much damage +2, not ×2, keep that in mind, +2, to that permanent or player instead. This card's really interesting, and I was originally slightly down on it, and by slightly down I mean it was still a C+ in my original notes. I saw it get played at the pre-release, and it played out really well, and it was kind of all of the places where I thought it would play out well. You don't play this on turn 2. You don't discard your hand on turn 2. That is a bad idea. You cast this on turn 5, 6, 7 when it's the last card in your hand. You discard nothing, and that's great, because then you're playing a 2-mana do-nothing enchantment on the first turn, but there's no downside to that. There's just a mediocre side, I suppose. And then Act 2, you immediately get 2 cards. So you draw 3 cards that turn, which is almost unheard of in red. It's super good in red. And then the third turn, any red source that you have is going to deal 2 extra damage. So all of your 1/1s, if you have any 1/1s, perhaps you have Siege Gang Commander, like Graham did at the pre-release, then those 1/1 goblins deal 3, which is real good. Again, we've got that whole problem of you're telling your opponent what's going to happen, and it's going to happen for one single turn, so it had better work out for you. Kinda sucks that you have to tell your opponent turns in advance what your exact plan is going to be. So that is still going to keep this a little bit low. I am going to put it at a B-, but it is a B-, assuming you play it correctly. Do not play this on turn 2. Do not play this with a full hand. Play this when you're discarding nothing or a land that you don't care about or something like that. And I think Act 2 is really kind of the act where I'm super happy. Drawing those 3 cards in red is going to feel real good. The third act, again, it's going to be great when it works out, and there's going to be so many times where your opponent just had 2 turns to prepare and you don't get to do much. So B- for Flame of Keld. Up next is Frenzied Rage. Frenzied Rage is 1 and a red for an enchantment aura at common. Enchanted creature gets +2/+1 and has Menace. So this, of course, is a functional reprint of Giant Spectacle. I guess Giant Spectacle didn't quite work in the Dominaria flavor. I think it could have, but whatever. Giant Spectacle didn't really quite live up to Madcap skills, which was +3/+0 and Menace for 1 and a red. And I imagine it's probably going to do worse here than even Giant Spectacle did. Giant Spectacle was kind of like a C-. It sometimes worked out in the Kaladesh block. But Frenzied Rage, I think there's just going to be more blockers. There's the Saprolings. There's a bunch of low-cost 1/3s and 2/3s that'll be around to block. And of course, late in the game, Menace becomes significantly less good. You will still lose to it. I will still lose to it. I just don't think you should play it super often. There are decks that will love it, but not many. So I'm going to cut it heavily at a C-. Up next is Gitu Chronicler. Gitu Chronicler is 1 and a red for a creature human wizard at common. She's a 1/3 with kicker for 3 and a red, so you can pay 4 red. When Gitu Chronicler enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Again, these 2 mana 1/3s, people seem to be a little bit high on them. I'm not super excited by them. Yes, they block the bears, but they don't do anything. They don't win you the game. You as much as I want blocking to be a mechanic, you don't win by blocking. That doesn't happen. So I'm not stoked for a 1 and a red for a 1/3. 6 mana to get a 1/3 that returns an instant or sorcery. I'm still not super sold on. I would need to be playing a large number of instants and sorceries, and the average deck plays 5, maybe 5 or 6, and they would need to all be really, really, really good to ensure that this creature is getting me back a really good spell. So I'm out on this card. I'm just not playing it. I don't think it's impactful enough. I've got it at a D+, just not for me. And again, it's another wizard that I don't really want to play to, enable my cancel to become a counter spell or something like that. Anyways, next up is Gitu Journeymage. Gitu Journeymage is 2 and a red for a creature human wizard. Another one for the wizard tribal at common. It's a 3/2 when Gitu Journeymage enters the battlefield. If you control another wizard, so it's a wizard that matters about wizards, Gitu Journeymage deals 2 damage to each opponent. I mean, again, this one's fine, at least. This one is totally fine. It's a 3/2 for 3, which is okay. It attacks and just kills all of those 1/3s that people are really, really high on for some reason. And it does do 2 damage to your opponent's face if you have another wizard. And I think these do get better in multiples because you would play 2 3/2s for 3 and not feel super sad about it. And that's 4 damage to your opponent's face just by casting them. Again, assuming you already had a wizard down. Yeah, I don't know. Even with all of that, I think it's just a C+ at best. Yeah, I'm going to stand by Wizard's Tribal being a trap. We'll see if it does become a trap or not, but I don't know. C+ for Gitu Journeymage. Up next is Gitu Lava Runner. Gitu Lava Runner is a single red mana for a creature human wizard at common. It's a 1/2. As long as there are 2 or more instant and or sorcery cards in your graveyard, Gitu Lava Runner gets +1/+0 and has haste. So it's got Spell Mastery, a mechanic we haven't seen since M15. Or Origins, one of the 2. This isn't any good, though. It is cool to see that old mechanic pop up, though. A 2/2 haste is good on exactly turn 1 and maybe turn 2 when you're not going to have 2 instants or sorceries in the graveyard at all, ever. I would almost guarantee that. It'll be a nice play sometimes when you just needed that extra 2 damage and your opponent didn't really think you would suddenly have a 2/2 haste, late game, that you have 5 attackers, they have 5 blockers, but surprise, you have 6. But this is just a really, really, really late pick and a very early cut. So C- for Gitu Lava Runner, another wizard that I don't want to play just to be able to cast Lightning Bolt. Up next is Goblin Barrage. Goblin Barrage is 3 and a red for a sorcery at uncommon. It's got kicker, sacrifice an artifact or a goblin. The Goblin Barrage deals 4 damage to target creature. If this spell was kicked, it also deals 4 damage to target player or planeswalker. 4 damage for 4 is a real downgrade from Fight with Fire, but it's still 100% playable and pickable. Late game, if you have an extra goblin or artifact kicking around, getting to deal 4 damage out of nowhere to your opponent could be a really serious thing. Probably, maybe just a game ender. All in all, I don't think I'm first picking this in too many packs, but I'll pick it fairly highly after that, just to kill creatures. And then if I do end up in the artifacts deck, which I think exists, a lot of people have argued with me that it doesn't exist, but I think if you can get those Orcish Vandals, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, pop in a Goblin Barrage or 2, I think you've got a deck. So we'll see if that happens. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I've got Goblin Barrage at a B-. I think it's just pretty solid. Up next is Goblin Chain Whirler. Goblin Chain Whirler is red, red, red for a creature Goblin Warrior at rare. It's a 3/3 first striker. When Goblin Chain Whirler enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. I don't super care for Goblin Chain Whirler. Triple red is not what I want to see here to cast this. Unless you're mono red or extremely heavy on red, which can be a very good deck, this isn't coming down on turn 3. Luckily, a 3/3 first striker is pretty relevant on turn 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7, 8, 9. The effect is really mediocre. The effect is, those cards that I don't play in the main deck, and I only side in when I see X ones. This is just not a rare that I want to see in my packs, because I think it is a pretty mid-pack, maybe a high mid-pack, but a pretty mid-pack card for me. This is actually my least favorite of all of the triple-colored spells, because this one doesn't even want you to be mono red. Being mono red, being heavily focused in red, doesn't make this card any better at all. So, not a big fan. I'm going to put this at a C+, if and only if you're a heavy red deck. If you're even anywhere close to like an 8-8 split or something, or a 9-9 split, because I have heard 18 lands is a good idea here, I don't think you play this. I think you cut it as like a 23rd card. So I've got it at a C+, but be careful with it. Up next is Goblin Warchief. Goblin Warchief is 1 red, red for a creature Goblin Warrior at uncommon. Goblin spells you have cost 1 less to cast. Goblins you control have haste. So this goes in the Goblin deck, which literally doesn't exist. There are 6 goblins in the set, and they're almost all mediocre or rare. So you are not building a goblins deck. Maybe 1 out of 100 times you'll actually build it, and it will be okay, I guess. I don't even know if it'll be okay. Anyways, Goblin Warchief is a 3-mana 2/2, basically, and that is bad. So I've got Goblin Warchief at like a D-. I don't think you play this. I don't think you pick this. If you happen to have gotten, a couple of Siege Gang commanders somehow, and I don't know, maybe a Squee or 2, although the Squee's not even that good, as we'll talk about a little bit later. Yeah, this deck doesn't exist. D-. Don't bother picking this. Don't even try to go into it. Up next is Haphazard Bombardment. Haphazard Bombardment is 5 and a red for an enchantment at rare. When Haphazard Bombardment enters the battlefield, choose 4 non-enchantment permanents you don't control and put an aim counter on each of them. At the beginning of your end step, if 2 or more permanents you don't control have a name counter on them, destroy 1 of those permanents at random. This is interesting. This is interesting. You get to randomly destroy 3 out of 4 target permanents over the course of 3 turns. For 6 mana. I'm not certain how I feel about that. If this was any cheaper, I'd certainly be into it, but I'm not super sold. You do have to choose 4. Now, if they only have 2 or 3, you do choose 2 or 3. But if they have, 6, 7 permanents, which, by the way, includes all of their land, so on turn 6, they're going to have 4 permanents. Yeah, I don't know how likely you are going to get the permanent you really want, because odds are, in a lot of scenarios, there's going to be 1 permanent that you desperately want dead, and then there will probably be upwards of 3 that you wouldn't mind, but you're looking at a 25% chance to blow up that big important one, and then a 33% chance, and then a 50% chance, and then you're done. That's obviously very, very Hearthstone-y, as I often comment on about expensive red rares in most sets. I'm not super sold on this. I'm going to have to see how it plays. I'm going to start out not playing it. I've got it at a D+. If it turns out to be really good, sure, but otherwise I'm not super sold. There are some weird interactions. You can choose a permanent with hexproof, so you can choose Lich's Mastery. Because you're choosing, you're not targeting. If there's an indestructible permanent, you don't destroy it. You can choose it. You can put a counter on it. And if it comes down to an indestructible permanent and not an indestructible permanent, the non-indestructible one is destroyed by default. The indestructible one can't randomly be chosen. So there's some interesting things there. Make sure you do check the release notes for that. But I'm at a D+ on Haphazard Bombardment. I'm going to have to see it played to know if it's good or not. Up next is our red planeswalker, Jaya Ballard. Jaya Ballard is 2 red, red, red for legendary planeswalker Jaya at Mythic. She starts with 5 loyalty. +1, add red, red, red. Spend this mana only to cast instant or sorcery spells. Also +1, discard up to 3 cards, then draw that many cards. Note, you're only drawing what you discard. You can't discard nothing and then draw 3. If you discard nothing, you draw nothing. Her -8, her ultimate, you get an emblem with you may cast instant and sorcery cards from your graveyard. If a card cast this way would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. So you get Past in Flames, a permanent Past in Flames, basically. I think Jaya's bad. I don't think she's really that playable and limited. Now, yes, at the pre-release, April King did amazing work with Jaya, but I think her deck was just good. And her deck was basically splashing Jaya. I think her deck won in spite of Jaya, to be honest. The red, red, red is a serious cost. She doesn't protect herself in any way. She helps you cast instant sorcery spells in what looks to be a creature set, as most creature sets are. She draws you cards only if you have a decently sized hand on turn 6+, and her ultimate takes several turns to get to. So outside of taking it because it pays for a portion of the draft at the moment, I don't think I'm playing this, even when I'm red. It's unfortunate. Usually Planeswalker is at least playable as a damage sponge, but even that, the 2 red, 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 kind of puts me off Jaya. I've actually got Jaya to D+. I don't think she's that great. I'm open to being proven wrong, but I don't think she's that good. D+ for Jaya. Up next is Jaya's Immolating Inferno. Jaya's Immolating Inferno is X red red for a legendary sorcery at rare. Jaya's Immolating Inferno deals X damage to each of up to 3 targets. This seems good. 2 damage is probably where this begins to be decent. I don't think I'm casting this for 1. 4, it's a solid card. 5 mana for 3 bolts is amazing. And 6 and above would just be crazy. The fact that this might be dead at times because you don't have a legendary creature is going to be something I'll keep a close eye on to see how often these legendary sorceries are actually online. As it is, I think I first pick this and make sure that I pick up a good number of legendaries and feel pretty darn good about it. So I've got this at a solid B. I think it's really, really good. So Jaya's Immolating Inferno, solid B. Make sure you pick up those legendary creatures. Up next is Keldon Overseer. Keldon Overseer is 2 in a red for a 3/1 creature human warrior at common. Kicker 3 in a red. It's got haste. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you gain control of target creature until end of turn. On tap, that creature gains haste until end of turn. So the usual threaten effect. Seems okay. A 3/1 for 3 is not a card that I really want to be playing, but with haste, it gets a bit better because you can just, get in. Your opponent had a 2/2 and you had a 2/2, and so they attack you and you don't trade, and then suddenly, unexpected to them, they're taking 5 because you have a 3/1 haste. So I think it's okay there. The kicked version is great, but 7 mana is a bit of a high ask. Odds are I think you cut this a little bit more often, depending on what your deck wants to be doing. If you are full on turn things sideways every turn aggro, I think this maybe even goes up to a C+. I think the average deck, this drops to a C-. So kind of C-, C+ for Keldon Overseer. Up next is Keldon Raider. Keldon Raider is 2 red red for a creature human warrior at common. It's a 4/3. When Keldon Raider enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Summit Prowler was always fine. 2 red red for a 4/3 is something we've seen several times. Giving it the optional upside to rummage if you want to makes it a little bit better, but not by much. I think it's still just a C, but it's like a high C, just not quite a C+. Don't feel bad playing this at all. C for Keldon Raider. Up next is Keldon Warcaller. Keldon Warcaller is 1 in a red for a creature human warrior at common. It's a 2/2. Whenever Keldon Warcaller attacks, put a lore counter on target saga you control. So again, a bear with an upside in red. It was crazy when we got a bear in red with a downside, as recent as like Khans of Tarkir block. Anyways, Keldon Warcaller is fine. It's just a straight C plus if you have sagas. If you don't have sagas, it's a C. It's a fine playable card. C plus for Keld and Warcaller. Up next is Orcish Vandal. Orcish Vandal is 1 and a red for a creature Orc Warrior at uncommon. It's a 1/1 tap, sack an artifact. Orcish Vandal deals 2 damage to any target. This is where the blue-red artifacts deck comes from that I've been talking about. And the blue side, yes, it doesn't mention artifacts a whole bunch, but it mentions historic, and all artifacts are historic. And then we have Orcish Vandal here, who strongly cares about artifacts, and obviously you need to get the Orcish Vandal or else the deck doesn't work out. So yes, it's a deck that I think is, you know, relatively rarely going to happen, but I think it could be cool. Anyways, Orcish Vandal I think is solid, and a solid role player if you do get that blue-red artifacts deck to come together. That being said, I don't know how often it's going to come together, but I will certainly be trying for this. So I've got this at, like, you know, kind of like a C plus, B minus if you are in the blue-red artifacts deck, which I'm going to stand by being a thing at some point in the format, I hope. And of course, if you don't have many artifacts, if you don't have many historic matters, this goes real low, because it is a 1/1 for 2. It is real small. So kind of a build around C plus, otherwise you probably just don't play it. So C plus for Orcish Vandal. Up next is Radiating Lightning. Radiating Lightning is 3 and a red for an instant at common. Radiating Lightning deals 3 damage to target player and 1 damage to each creature that player controls. So 4 mana, instant speed, 3 damage is something I'm usually pretty happy about, but it's only 3 damage to face. Only 3 damage to face, and then 1 damage to all the creatures. So this is this is the definition of the sideboard cards, the cards that I never ever main deck. Other people always do main deck, and I am going to stand firm on never main decking this card, but the second you see, 2, 3, 4, 5 X1s, or the second you see a bunch of Taproolings, this comes in out of the sideboard real fast. So sideboard D+, nothing higher. Up next is Rampaging Cyclops. Rampaging Cyclops is 3 and a red for a creature Cyclops at common. It's a 4/4. Rampaging Cyclops gets -2/-0 as long as 2 or more creatures are blocking it. I don't quite get the flavor here, like, it's rampaging, it's angry. Are the 2 creatures like just calming it down? I don't know. Anyways, a 4/4 for 4 is fine. Double blocking a 2/4 on turn 5 doesn't really sound all that hard though. Probably just filler. I think you cut it when you can and you play it if you need to, so it's kind of a low C. Low C for Rampaging Cyclops. Up next is Run Amok. Run Amok is 1 and a red for an instant at common. Target attacking creature gets +3/+3 and gains trample until end of turn. But you can't run Amok because it's not in the format. You see, the joke is that Amok is a card from the Stronghold set. Anyways, this is a fine combat trick. Your creature will live usually and get through for some incidental damage, assuming they're attacking. They have to be attacking. It is target attacking creature only. Don't trumpet blast yourself on defense here. A solid C combat trick. Not really much else to say. C for Run Amok. Up next is Seismic Shift. Seismic Shift is 3 and a red for a sorcery at common. Destroy target land. Up to 2 target creatures can't block this turn. This is one of the cheapest and best land destruction cards we've seen lately, and it's still not good. Also, I'm not sure why it affects flying creatures. Why would a Seismic Assault, or it's not Seismic Assault, why would a Seismic Shift affect flyers? Anyways, I don't think you play this. Only turning off 2 creatures isn't that big of a game. It doesn't really just end the game like something like Magmatic Chasm does. And land destruction is just never really worth it unless it's stupidly cheap or Armageddon, or there are a ludicrous number of very important lands in the set, which there aren't any of those here. I think you maybe side this in some matchups, but even there, I'm not really sure when you do it. So D- for Seismic Shift. Up next is Shivan Fire. Shivan Fire is a single red mana for an instant at common. Kicker 4 generic mana. Shivan Fire deals 2 damage to target creature. If the spell was kicked, it deals 4 damage to that creature instead. So it's shock for creatures, and then if you have extra mana kicking around, it's 2 shocks for creatures. Is that Flame Slash, I believe? Anyways, it's a good card. It's just a good card. It's instant speed. It kills little creatures early, and then it kills bigger creatures later. Very high C+. It's not exactly premium removal. I could probably be talked up to B-. I don't think there's a big difference in grades there, but you probably don't first pick this. I think the pack would have to be bad for you to first pick this, but you do pick it, very high mid pack, and maybe later packs when you're red and there's just not that much red, it becomes a higher pick. So C+ for Shivan Fire. Up next is Siege Gang Commander. Siege Gang Commander is 3 red for a creature goblin at rare for a 2/2, and this is a great goblin, but it's at rare, which means you're not getting 2 of these hardly ever for your Goblin Warchief to make them cheaper. It's a 2/2. When Siege Gang Commander enters the battlefield, create 3 1/1 red Goblin creature tokens. Pay 1 and a red, sacrifice a Goblin. Siege Gang Commander deals 2 damage to any target. So all of your Goblins, including Siege Gang Commander, become expensive shocks. It's really good. It's 5/5 for 5, which is solid. Spread across 4 bodies. A relevant-ish creature type. If you do have Goblin Warchief, I guess, but don't. And getting 4 expensive shocks is a solid all-around card. It's first pick. It's not 100% inside of bomb territory. Like, I don't think you just win because you play this. So I don't know that I'm going to put it at an A, but I think it is a very high B+. Could even be an A-. I'd happily first pick this in most packs, unless the format turns out to completely disallow aggro, which I can't imagine it would, even if it is a slower format. So B+ for Siege Gang Commander. Up next is Skirk Prospector. Skirk Prospector is a single red mana for a creature goblin at common. It's a 1/1, sack a goblin, add red. No. Seems like a constructed commander plant. You know, throw this in your Krenko deck where you have like 50 goblins and now you've got 50 red mana to, I don't know, pump into your Crater's Claw or something to blow stuff up. I don't like it. I don't like 1/1s for 1. I don't think this ramps me to anything decent. I don't think the Goblin deck exists. I think this is just a D-. You don't play this card. Up next is Skizzik. Skizzik is 3 and a red for a creature elemental at uncommon. It's a 5/3 with kicker of a single red mana, so not even slightly expensive. It's got trample, it's got haste, and at the beginning of the end step, if it wasn't kicked, you sacrifice it. So we've got ourselves Ball Lightning here for 1 more mana, except it's easier to cast because it's not triple red and it has 1 less power and 1 more toughness, which never matters for Ball Lightning. But if you've got that extra red mana, you've got yourself a 5/3 trample haste that sticks around. And if it doesn't just die, which it's not going to die as easily as a Ball Lightning at least, it could start doing some real serious damage. I like Skizzik. I like Skizzik a fair bit, in fact. I don't know that I would first pick it. In fact, I would almost guarantee I wouldn't first pick it. But I would pick it relatively highly when I know I want to be red. It would be a curve topper in a real aggressive red deck. I've got it a B-. I think Skizzik is real good. B- for Skizzik. Up next is Squee the Immortal. Squee the Immortal is 1 red for a legendary creature goblin. It's a 2/1. You may cast Squee the Immortal from your graveyard or from exile. So Squee never, ever, ever dies. Squee is an okay filler card at best. It's an expensive piker, which is not something I'm sold on, and I can expensively recur it by having to pay the full price again every time I want it to come back. And it doesn't have flash. You can't be doing this on your opponent's turn or anything. I think it goes mid to late pack, and I think you play it if you need a creature, and that's about it. I don't think C+ is even really appropriate for Squee. I just have it at a straight C. It's expensive for what it is, so C for Squee. Up next is Two-Headed Giant, a card name that I'm really annoyed by. I don't like that there's a format that has a card named after it. Anyways, 2 red for a creature giant warrior at rare. It's a 4/4. Whenever Two-Headed Giant attacks, flip 2 coins. If both come up heads, Two-Headed Giant gains double strike until end of turn. If both comes up tails, Two-Headed Giant gains menace until end of turn. Not a big fan. It is a 4/4 for 4, which is 100% okay. You will always play a 4/4 for 4. Beyond that, the card's something I hate. It's a Hearthstone card. You're randomizing what my cards do. Magic has randomization in the cards that you draw, the mana base, etc. It doesn't need randomization on its creatures. Anyways, it's 50-50 that this has no abilities when it attacks. It's 50% chance. Unfortunately, both abilities this could have would typically determine if you attack or not. Looking at the board, your opponent's board, they have 1 creature, and it's a 4/4. If this always had menace, you would always attack. But only 25% of the time is it going to have menace. The other time it's going to have double strike, which actually I guess would work in that specific situation. But anyways, I think not knowing what your creature's going to do when you turn it sideways is a really, really big problem. So I'm not super sold on Two-Headed Giant. It's a card that I don't like to see in Magic. I'm fine with it in Unstable, where I just throw everything to the wind. But in an actual set, I don't want this much randomization. I'm going to put it at C+, because it is a 4/4 for 4. Even though 50% of the time it is just a 4/4 for 4, that's fine. So C+ for Two-Headed Giant. Please keep this much randomization out of my actual cards. Up next is Valduk, Keeper of the Flame. Valduk, Keeper of the Flame is 2 and a red for a legendary creature human shaman at uncommon. He's a 3/2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, for each aura and equipment attached to Valduk, Keeper of the Flame, create a 3/1 red elemental creature token with trample and haste. Exile those tokens at the beginning of the next end step. I don't like it. It's all about putting all of your eggs in one basket here. You play Valduk, and then you play your auras and your equipment. And there are some good ones. There are a couple of good equipments, and there are some good enchantments. You know, On Sarah's Wings is really good. But you just have to hope your opponent doesn't bounce this or kill it. And then all of those cards and all of the mana that you put into it go away. And you maybe got a little bit of extra damage in because the elementals don't even stick around. I'm going to lose to this thing with like 7 auras thrown on it, and I'll complain about it, but that doesn't mean you should go all in on this. If you have some ways of protecting it from the hate, it could get better. You know, if you have... I can't even think of a God's Willing style effect in this format. I'd have to go back and check. It might get a little bit better. And at its fail case, it is a 3/2 for 3, which is filler level playable. So I'm not going to go lower than a C. And I think I could go up to a C+ just because of the potential upside you can get from this. Might even eat some removal before you get the auras on it because your opponent's afraid of it. And if you need it for a legendary historic reason, there you go. But I'm not going to go any higher than a C+ on Valduk, Keeper of the Flame. Up next is Varric's Bladewing. Varric's Bladewing is 2 red for a legendary creature dragon at Mythic. It's a 4/4. It has flying, of course. It has kicker 3 generic mana. When Varric's Bladewing enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create Karok's Bladewing, a legendary 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. So you get a 4/4 flyer for 4. 100% first pickable right there. It's a French vanilla creature, but it's a really, really well-costed one that will end games pretty quickly. If you don't drop this on turn 4, and you draw it just a few turns later, getting an 8/8 for 7 is insane value. I don't know that you really keep this around. Like, if you have this in your hand and it's turn 4, you play it. If it's turn 5 or 6... I'd be torn on waiting a turn or two, especially if I had the lands in hand. I would always wait. Getting that 8/8 flyer for 7, split across 2 bodies, requiring 2 pieces of removal is insane value. This is a snap first pick. It's as bomby as you can get without having, you know, extra rules, text, and complications on it. So straight A for Varric's Bladewing. Up next is Warcry Phoenix. Warcry Phoenix is 3 red for a creature Phoenix at uncommon. I think it's our first uncommon Phoenix. It's a 2/2 flying haste. Whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, you may pay 2 and a red. If you do, return Warcry Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. It's a very solid Phoenix. 2/2 flyer for 4 is a little bit overcosted, but that haste means you get in for 2 right away, which you'll often do if your opponent doesn't have flyers. Coming back for only 3 mana if you're attacking is nice and cheap and will end the game quick, but how often are you attacking with 3 or more creatures and not already just winning the game anyways? It's still good because, you know, it's not like this is a dumb enchantment or something that you're playing instead of a creature. If you pay 2 and a red, you're getting a 2/2 haster back, tapped and attacking. Obviously doesn't fit in a more controlling deck as anything more than a okay good creature, but I've got this at a B-. I think it's a relatively high pick, and I think it does go in a significant portion of decks. So B+ for Warcry Phoenix. Up next is Warlord's Fury. Warlord's Fury is a single red mana for a sorcery at common. Creatures you control gain first strike until end of turn. Draw a card. I'm not a big fan of this. First strike to the team and draw a card for 1 red mana is decent. You know, you can't get any cheaper than that. Sorcery is the only real problem here because you're not surprising your opponent at all. There's no surprise. Your opponent will know exactly what they need to do for blocks and their own combat tricks and removal and etc. But it does replace itself, and it's probably just playable in a flood the board all-out aggro sort of deck. It's not a high pick by any stretch of the imagination, but I'd be shocked if you couldn't consistently wheel it. And I think you do only cut it if you're not on the full aggro plan. Obviously, goes insane with Quende, but we're getting into multi-card combos there that just have to work and be in your pool. So C for Warlord's Fury. Our final card for red is Wizard's Lightning. Wizard's Lightning is 2 and a red for an instant at uncommon. This spell costs 2 less to cast if you control a wizard. Wizard's Lightning deals 3 damage to any target. So it's Lightning Bolt or it's Bombard. Both of those cards are 100% okay. Both of those cards are 100% first pickable. I don't really care that this can be Lightning Bolt. I'm picking it because it's Bombard. Or Open Fire is more correct. No, yeah, Open Fire. Sorry, Bombard is 4 damage. It's Open Fire. Yeah, if I have wizards and this actually costs me 1 red mana, cool. But I'm not going deep on that. I'm not playing Gitu Lava Runner and other garbage wizards just to get this to be Lightning Bolt. It's still just fantastic as Open Fire. So solid B here. I don't care about the Wizards tribal deck making this any cheaper. Straight B for Wizards Lightning. So that's going to wrap it up for red. Let me know what you think of the red cards. There's some really good stuff there. Varric's Bladewing looks insane, and I really hope I open one. There's some cool little things here. I am definitely going to try out that Artifacts deck. I think it could actually work, despite what some comments I've gotten. But yeah, let me know what you think of red, what your cards you're excited about. Do you strongly disagree with me on Jaya? That's probably the lowest grade I've ever given a Planeswalker ever. Let me know in the comments down below. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at TheManaLeek. That's Leek, like the vegetable, not the card. You can find me at Facebook.com/TheManaLeek, Twitch.tv/TheManaLeek, and Patreon.com/TheManaLeek. If you like the content, click that thumbs up button. If you want to see more and you haven't already, click subscribe. And if you do have questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see y'all tomorrow for the green set review.